Hello, my name is Tracy. Welcome to this engineering leadership series. So excited to kick off today with Medha. Medha, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Tracy. My name is Medha Parlikar. I'm the Chief Technology Officer and one of the co-founders of Casper Labs. And Casper Labs has built the technology that bootstraps the public Casper network, a decentralized blockchain public protocol.
Amazing. So how long have you been doing this? What did you do before?
Yeah, so I got involved in technology in the early 80s. It's kind of cliche, but my dad and I started building computers in the basement and been working with IT and personal computing since that time, pretty much seamlessly the entire time. And worked my way into, I worked in Web 2 for quite some time, what they now call Web 2, but it is really dynamic websites, interactive websites versus non-interactive websites, which are just informational websites. And kind of fell into the blockchain rabbit hole in 2017, where I started working with an open source layer one, the development and prototyping of a layer one public blockchain. And during the crash that followed the 2017 ICO boom, that project ran out of money. And I was approached by my other co-founders to co-found Casper Labs with the express purpose of building a technology, a public decentralized blockchain technology that could be used in the enterprise, right? To bring the technology to the end user, to the masses.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that. I feel like, it's amazing that you've been doing it since 2017. I feel like that makes you a true veteran of the space, but 6 years, I feel like it's probably evolved quite significantly. But I do still feel like there's a lot of conversations in our enterprise surrounding how do we blockchain thing, right? And it's just kind of like a buzzword. So what advice, I guess, do you give people with that? If, a CIO comes to you and just says hey, we want to invest in blockchain, what does that mean for them?
Yeah, so I don't see blockchain technology very different from cloud technology or the internet in terms of technology. I feel there's a very well-established way in which enterprises and large software companies adopt a novel technology into their application stack. And my advice to the CTO and CIO would be, well, you want somebody that's going to really understand the tech to help you climb the mountain, right? Have a Sherpa. And Red Hat was definitely a pioneer with Linux in this. AWS and AWS certified engineers definitely helped with the cloud transition. VMware helped with the cloud transition. So you definitely see these companies that have not just been the Sherpa, but they've also been very seminal in those technologies, right? They played a very leading role in the development of that technology. They were experts in the technology. And I feel that, we have positioned ourselves in a very similar manner. And so I would tell them is that there is a way to adopt it that isn't scary, it isn't daunting, and it can be incremental because enterprises have to do things very incrementally. They have to mitigate risk. They need to be able to respond to regulatory challenges. The regulatory environment is still very uncertain. And so they really need to, they're risk averse, and they should be. They should proceed with extreme caution. And so my guidance to them would be, it's a disruptive technology. It offers great value and holds tremendous promise. Proceed with a trusted partner that will allow you to proceed in an incremental fashion.
Yeah. Can you give me an example maybe of how somebody has done that? Because I love just, learning about what's the first step that you kind of take people through.
Yeah, definitely. The first step when we engage with a company is we learn a lot about their business. What is it that you do? How do you use technology today? What are some of the opportunities in this space? What are your thoughts? What are their thoughts? They know their business best, right? What are the opportunities to streamline and uplift your current business model? And how do you see, and then we tell them how we see this technology playing a role, right? And we go through this ideation and like a collaborative creation process with them. And it's really more about like a strategic session than it is a rote implementation session. And this is something that I think is unique. A lot of times when you work with consulting companies, they may not necessarily go through a strategic session with you. There's just a few that can actually do that, have those conversations. So we start with that. And then once the customer decides that they have like, okay, we agree that this is a great path forward. We believe we can get internal stakeholder buy-in. We can see that there's a return on investment. Then we proceed to, use case definition, some light demos, right? We will give them some clickable demos that they can go and then get stakeholder buy-in. And they get stakeholder buy-in, and then we go into the actual implementation of a prototype, and then ultimately a production pilot.
What are some of the more successful implementations you've seen?
So this is interesting. We've have a couple of really successful implementations that we're proud of. One is IPWE. They do intellectual property management on public blockchain. They use the public Casper network. And so if you have a repository of patents, those patents are minted as NFTs on Casper. And you can claim your patents, claim that ownership. And then if you wish to sell, lease, or otherwise transfer your patents to someone, you can use their valuation and marketplace in which you can get your intellectual property valued and then put it up for sale on their marketplace. And the public Casper protocol will track all the provenance and ownership of those intellectual property assets.
In terms of, full, adoption of blockchain technologies for enterprises, do you see that being like a 1 to 2 year investment, kind of like a 5-year investment to fully realize the potential?
Oh my gosh. So I feel like we started realizing the full potential of the internet just in the past 5 years. To be perfectly clear, I believe before that we were just laying pipe for the internet. I've been involved in the internet since 1997. And it took, if you talk about why did it take that long? There's a lot of reasons why it took that long. Well, when we started, it was dial-up. And I feel like blockchain is in the dial-up phase of its adoption. Bandwidth was really slow. The physical infrastructure wasn't in place. We didn't have mobile devices that really made it permeate our lives in a way where, the internet's always with me. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere I go, right? And if you talk about it really like getting to that point where you depend on it, it's not something that you just use occasionally, but rather you depend on it. There's a dependence on it. That curve is, 12 to 15 years away from blockchain, I feel, maybe even 20. Simply because, again, we depend on silicon and bandwidth. That is the base layer of a blockchain. That's the slowest part. That's what it is bound by. And so if you think about it, music streaming wasn't a reality until we had 5G, right? I mean, you could do it with LTE, but it was a little shaky and there was still capacity issues. It was expensive, right? All these, everything, like the economics had to make sense. The silicon had to come up, right? Everybody had to have access to mobile devices, and then you had to have the app store, right? You had all the applications that use the content that was being created, that use the bandwidth and so on. So you need to build up all of that plumbing. I feel like with blockchain technology, we're going to see the same thing, but we'll see it, with wallet technology and then user training and being able to use these wallets to perform transactions at blockchain. You have to see bandwidth go up, right? Again, the fiber to fiber connectivity of networks. And then you need to see, even silicon go up in terms of like the capability of the machines that are actually processing the blockchain transactions, that processing speed to increase. So the blockchains can actually process more throughput, right? So I think there's a lot of work that Moore's Law has to do first before we can really start seeing it become ubiquitous.
Yeah, I love this. With this ChatGPT thing, right? It was just like that one thing. I mean, even though it's been baking for a while, but like this one thing that just really made it feel like, oh my gosh, this is now a part of our lives, right? I mean, I still remember you think about like, MapQuest, right? And I remember printing out like 10 different MapQuests to try to get somewhere. And then Google came up with like the texting. You could text to try to have Google text you directions. And now all of a sudden it's just on your phone and it's amazing. And we, we love and depend on it.
That's exactly right. Like there was a lot of infrastructure that needed to be laid down to make that seamless user experience and to make it available, right? You needed the GPS satellites. Then you needed the GPS to become tiny enough that it could go in a phone. But before that, you had it in your car, right? So then you had the navigation systems in your car. And now nobody even bothers with the navigation system. You just plug your phone in because it's gone from like being something this big to something this big to something that's like a chip, this tiny, that can go into your phone. And I think you're going to see the exact same thing happen with blockchain. I think it's going to take 15 to 20 years. I think that transition also took 20 years. I remember in 2007, 2008, 1997, 1998, you had to use the physical Thomas Brothers guide, the Thomas guide to actually, you would have to photocopy the pages. You'd have to highlight the route, or you'd have to give your driver like the page number and the grid. There was this grid. It'd be like, page 189, J4, and that would be the pin, and that would be the address they'd have to go to. And so then they would literally flip the pages and map out their destination. And now we just count on it, and people can travel internationally and not even worry about getting lost when they're in another city, right? And Uber uses it. It's like there's just a whole bunch of capabilities that it took a long time to get there. But I think the same thing's going to happen in this tech too.
Yeah. So you think we're still like 10 to 15 years out in a sense? Yeah,
from it being ubiquitous. Absolutely.
Yeah.
For sure.
So how do, I guess, we talked a little bit about how people kind of get started in a sense, right? Just having strategic conversations, having the trusted partners, et cetera. But, let's just take a random company off the street. Like, let's say, I don't know, we could say like T-Mobile or Fiserv or, some example like that, right? Like how in your mind, having worked with like so many different enterprises, do you think that they could utilize blockchain?
There's a lot of interesting ways depending on their business, right? So the way I see blockchain is it's a trust protocol. I see the internet, TCP/IP, as an information protocol. Right, so you can disseminate information using TCP/IP over a wide area network that is the internet, right? Now, if you take some information and you pass it through a blockchain protocol, you can now trust that information. And because you can trust that information and you can trust when that information is written to the blockchain, what it was written to, right? Who wrote it, right? Under what circumstances was it written to? Because you've established that trust around it, you can start streamlining other operations, right? And so like the most obvious one would be multi-party transactions. This is what you see Bitcoin and Ethereum and these other things doing. Like if you and I want to transact, we don't need to use a third party, which is like, or an intermediary. That could be a bank, it could be a credit agency, it could be Swift, whatever. We don't have to use that third party. Now we can just use the blockchain as the arbiter of trust, right? I'm not able to lie about how much I have to send you. Right? So, and therefore, and when I send it to you, I am not able to pull it back, right? So those are the basic problems that, for a two-party transaction, the blockchain solves. But this can be extended to many parties, right? This can be extracted to like 4, 5, 6, 7 parties. So being able to establish trust in transactions, in a multi-party transaction, is really where the beauty of the blockchain comes into play, right? Examples are reputation, right? Like provable references, as an example. How often can references be forged? Did this person actually work for this company for so many years? You could use blockchain technology over a period of time and establish trust there. Another thing is like, did I actually order this? Do I actually own this thing? Is it authentic, or is it a knockoff? Is it a forgery, right? So when you talk about track and trace in a supply chain, you can talk about the provenance or the authenticity of goods. Who was the issuer of this certificate? Who was the issuer of this good, right? Is this a copy of something else? So the blockchain provides great copy protection. So this is the way we tell enterprises to think about how they can use blockchain and the value that it brings.
And then, sounds fun, but where does the ROI really come in? Like, where do you see people really getting the most ROI out of this?
Yeah, definitely. So I think what we've seen is in a few places that are really popping up is one, we're seeing people getting liquidity out of illiquid assets. And so what's an illiquid asset? A patent is an illiquid asset. It has a very low level of liquidity. And what does that mean? It's really hard to buy and sell patents, right? If you were an enterprising startup founder and you're like, gosh, I have this great idea, I need to see if there's any existing prior art around this. Probably the best way for you to do that is to hire a patent attorney, honestly. There really isn't a resource for you to go and discover those patents and discover if you wanted to purchase one, what is the cost of it? What value is it at? Who owns it? Is it even available? What lawsuits happened with that? You can't find any of that information. There's no trusted source for it. That makes it easy and accessible. So this is the liquidity problem, right? So it's discoverability and creating markets around a specific piece of, around an asset. And we've seen a couple of use cases for that. The other one you see is like copy protection, right? So like I have an authentic thing and you can't copy it. And the value in that, of course, is forgery, right? So you're eliminating forgery, right? You are being able to really capture value in whatever it is that you create. And then that makes that item, right, that helps retain that value. And we all know like what forgeries do to markets, right, in terms of diluting the value of forged goods, right, whatever they may be. So like these are two very simple examples of the ROI. You know, we also work with financial institutions to actually create like a living balance sheet, right, where you can take assets and you can tokenize them, and you're not just looking at the assets on the sheet, but you're also looking at the associated liabilities. And now you've got a living and breathing balance sheet. And so just imagine what a difference that would have made if Silicon Valley Bank had a real-time balance sheet. Like if they could really see the liabilities on their sheet, what the impact that would have been to, you know, the markets at whole, right? So I think there's tremendous opportunity for value here.
What about all this fun AI stuff? Has it really, I mean, I feel like it's definitely changing the conversation in the Web 2 world for sure. And like, how do you build websites? Do search engines even matter anymore? How do you make your website searchable to AI, right? How do you build? Is there any conversations around blockchain and AI these days?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the really important things that need to be considered around AI is the training and the ownership of these models and the data sets, right? So the way to have a sustainable AI for the long run, right? Sustainable AI infrastructure for the long run is really to have these AIs be managed and governed by decentralized communities, right? You certainly don't want to have AI capture, right? When I say capture, I mean there's a cabal or a group of people that can now train the model in a very specific way, right? And there's a real danger to that, right? Like I think AI is it's a very, very promising technology, but it is very disruptive, but it could become dangerous. It could be weaponized. And I think we need to be extremely careful as a society around how these AI models are governed, how they're used, right? What they're used for, and how they're trained and what those data sets look like. And I feel like when you decentralize something, you definitely get the collective consciousness of the community behind that technology, which I think is very, very important when you're looking at something as important as AI.
Are you seeing any of the kind of like larger, leading AI companies or, you know, these data, like, are you seeing them invest in blockchain or kind of go towards a more decentralized approach, or is this still something that's just being talked about?
I think you're going to see this happen. I think you're going to see this come about not from the AI community, but I think you're going to see it come from the blockchain community. It will be very interesting to see how this all shakes out and how it evolves. But I do believe that you will see individuals that will collaborate along AI experts and blockchain experts collaborate to build a mechanism by which the training and the governance of AI systems are managed through a decentralized blockchain, a decentralized public permissionless blockchain.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait for that to start coming about. It sounds like it's incredibly necessary. It's just like, and it sounds like it's necessary now too. So I really do hope. Yeah.
It is. It's a very complex problem to solve. There's a lot of things to consider around it. But yeah, it is really, really necessary. I believe it will still take some time unless there's some stealth projects out there that I'm not aware of. I feel like it's still very, very much in the early days.
Yeah, I feel like, if you think about, this as an investment, right? So for me, when I think about this, I'm like, man, this is a really important initiative that needs to happen. Like a community of people need to gather around a set of standards. And then I just get so exhausted because, being in the open source world, right? And kind of the Web 2 world, it's like, well, it basically means that people who really care and are passionate about this need to do this for free, right? Who's it going to be funded by? It's only in the past few years, I feel like, that, venture capitalists have invested and funded open source, right? Or are starting to think about like open source as something funded. So I would hope that somebody or something is like thinking about this and like wanting to hopefully fund this to kind of push this along.
For sure.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think last topic is just, love seeing more women in leadership, of course. Your CTO position, were you CTO of a company prior, or did you just become this after you co-founded?
Yeah, so in my career, I've functioned at a pretty high level in engineering organizations, but typically at a senior director of engineering reporting into the CTO or reporting into the head of engineering. This is my first time actually holding the role of chief technology officer. I've been at the head of engineering for Casper Labs since its inception. And I feel like, there's definitely differences between being, a senior director of engineering in a large organization vis-a-vis being the head of engineering in a small startup and, holding the title of CTO. And then you layer in a blockchain, which is a completely different thing altogether with with an open source community and a Casper community on top of that. So yeah, this is my first rodeo as an official CTO.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun.
Did you, so like, stepping into the role, right? Do you look back and think like, oh, I didn't realize I needed these skills?
So really, that's a really interesting question. I actually feel like I was always a leader, an engineering leader. I never really felt like I lacked the skills to be an engineering executive, if you will, or a CTO. I feel that in terms of, so what are some of the skills that I need? I feel like time management is definitely a big skill that I need. Being able to find time to do quiet thought and research with the millions of meetings that I have. My schedule is very, very challenging. And that's probably and I consider myself to be very, very, very good at time management, but it is constantly, about is this the right thing for me to be focusing on? Is this the most important thing for me to be doing today? Where should I be focusing my time and energy, both in my own development, my continuing education and continuing development, but as well as contributing within the company, right, in a whole myriad of tasks.
Yeah, that's a really great piece of advice. Well, thank you so much for being on. Really appreciated having you. Where can we find you on the internet if we want to learn more?
Oh, you can find me on Twitter at @mparlikar. You can learn more about our company at casperlabs.io, and you can learn about the Casper Network at casper.network.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on today.